Okay. Thank you for joining. We're going to get started. You're all on mute. At the end, we'll unmute again for questions and answers. Over here in Leah watching is Derek DeBear and Tim. And what we're going to do is introduce it as we are with all these sessions in the same way. So there's a similar logic to them all, depending if you're dropping in on one of them or if you're following the whole series. So these sessions were born out of the fact that speaking to our training community, we had a lot of experts and some people who don't come from graphic arts backgrounds. And obviously we are a digital printing company, and so there is a very strong alliance between understanding graphic arts and colour and understanding what falls out of the back of our printing presses. So these small 1 hour, 40-minute exercises have been put together. There's 1 to 9 altogether. And today, in session number 3, it's a little bit disjointed is this session, but it has a logical follow-on from the last one, where we looked at colour, the relationship between light and colour, and what we see and how we can relate that to what we print. Today we're going to look at colour choices in pre-press, constructing a PDF. One of the things I'd like you to take from this particular session is just how complicated making a graphic arts file is, and some of the choices well, I say our customers, but often our customers are faced with when trying to put something together. And throughout this, I hope you can then sort of logically distill where some of the pitfalls are when we see something out of the back of the press which might surprise us, because our press might be doing something perfectly okay, yet the file may contain some surprises that we're not aware of and our customers aren't aware of. So as I say, it's a little bit disjointed, but we're going to sort of step in and try to finish off the last session, which included which was more about images. So as we had last time, we had image appreciation. This is artwork appreciation. So we're going to discuss first of all RGB images, a little bit of a bane in my life because they're the things that often cause more trouble than anything, and it's very difficult not to sometimes fall into intellectual discussions around them being the best thing since sliced bread or the worst thing since sliced bread. Yes, they can contain more colour than CMYK. They have a bigger gamut, but often the question is how important is that if you can't actually print it. So as always, if we see the little Photoshop icon down at the bottom, it means that we're going to take a trip into Photoshop to start to investigate some bits and pieces. So we're going to start off very, very, very simply. This is a RGB file. You'll remember from our exercises last time, we have our friendly pipette, which gives us information. And you'll notice I've taken 2 colour samples on this particular blue. And here we have the RGB data. And next to it, number 2, we have the corresponding LAB data. Now, this exercise today, we're not diving deeply into profiles. That's going to be the next session. But this is going to give you some sort of flavour of where that next session might be going. Also in this orange patch, we have a similar setup. We have RGB data, and we have CMYK, LAB data in number 4. The reason for this is that often out of the box, sometimes people think RGB is somehow finite. However, it's not. RGB describes the pixel value. However, we rely on our profile to give us our colour value. So if we have a look at how we're set up today, currently this document is set to sRGB. However, we see here Adobe 98, and if I press the button there, if I flick backwards and forwards, I'm sure you're seeing the monitor change colours. But what I'd like to show you is that when we move to Adobe RGB, the RGB values stay identical, yet our lab values, our colour values have changed. So the lesson here is, first of all, is when working with RGB, what do you want to see? And this what do you want is going to permeate a lot of the lessons we start to learn when we look at colour management. So one of the things that drives this are Photoshop settings. It would be fair to say that most graphic arts pictures, and we're going to talk about unprofessional pictures as well, will pass through Photoshop or Adobe products at some point in its life. And depending on the settings we have in there, will depend on the RGB colour which is being defined. It would be fair to say, and I say this just out of my own experience, these settings are often not known about within a graphic arts environment. Within a very professional environment, people understand these settings, but more and more and more these settings are ignored, and people don't know how their system is set up. I see very much in England that this setting is often used. For me, I prefer to use sRGB for RGB images, but that's a personal choice. However, if we look at Europe Prepress, it moves to Adobe RGB. So what we're learning here is that there's, right at the beginning of the production cycle of an image, there's some very serious choices being made, and often being made by the software and not the people putting the job together. I don't know if you'd agree with that, by the way.
Yeah.
Now, we're all aware of the difference between, there are some CMYK standards such as GRACOL and FOGRA and SWAP. The thing is, those standards, when printed, actually look very, very similar. However, with our world of RGB, things can look very, very different. So I'm just going to open So there's often the expression comparing apples with apples. Here we have two images which have exactly the same RGB pixel values. However, one is sRGB and one is Adobe 98. Now, depending where the wind blows or who's put my Photoshop together, if I'm in a graphic studio, I could be choosing either one of these, which are perfectly acceptable as far as the graphics community is concerned, as colour spaces. I think I just need to mute. So there is no real lesson about right or wrong here. The lesson is there's choice, and often that choice is not understood, or it can be a pitfall. Some people prefer Adobe 98. Some people don't know what it is. sRGB looks more natural. However, these two are totally interchangeable, and we can create this look and feel with our sRGB. Oops, I don't want to convert. So I've not changed any of the RGB values, just applied a new profile. And I hope you see there's a big difference. So lesson one is, I guess, when dealing with RGB, we have to be taking account of what do we actually want to see. Now, we can actually look at what's in gamut. So the red colour you see on your screen now are colours which are not possible to print within a offset environment. And if I try to now turn that on for my sRGB, we see no red. So this gives us an indication that sRGB is nearer to a printable standard. So if we work to sRGB, you could say you're going to have less surprises, but on the other hand, you could also argue that you're losing a lot of punch and let's turn the gamut warning off. Could also argue we're losing a lot of punch and colour vibrance. So again, it's down to choice. If we do convert these files to CMYK, we will maintain a certain look and feel of them. So here we have in a combined job, this is now CMYK. Everything we see is now printable. And we've converted the sRGB apple to CMYK and the 98. We see that they're now very different CMYK values, and it's taken on that look and feel. But which is right? Well, we've got to realise that these are choices that we have to undertake within the pre-press environment. And I just wanted to point out that these are very different and can cause if not used correctly, some big changes on the final output on a job. I often hear people just saying, "Oh, I like Adobe 98," and that's because they like this look and feel of it. But often they ignore the fact that a lot of the things are not reproducible. So, do we keep or do we convert? Keeping this discussion to just 2 slides, and I'm sure it could be for hours. For photographers, keeping RGB is important. They like to edit images in RGB, and usually they have a subjective preference around whichever they like to use. And there are other industry standards such as Photo Pro and ECI RGB. Photographers might print on technology that can near reproduce these gamuts, such as wide gamut photo printers. I've got an example down at the bottom there in a picture with that machine using 12 different inks. However, they may get a shock when they take their wonderfully reproduced and looked after image and ask it to be reproduced in a process which doesn't have that gamut. So it's true, RGB is a purer way of sending data. It has a bigger gamut, and that's a pro. But a con is, or one of the things which can let it down, is that we must describe the sort of look and feel of the way we want those pictures to look. Do we want them to have that vibrance of Adobe 98, or do we want to have it the more natural look of sRGB? And that question might be out of your control. Now, also, once you've made those decisions, unless you couple that with a process with a good output profile, the results can be very disappointing because we're having to convert that file to a CMYK, eventually a CMYK printing gamut. And not only can they be disappointing, they can be a lot worse if that profile's not done correctly. So there's some danger there. A lot of this is my opinion, but also it's a little bit of a conclusion. So one thing you need to take away from this is that RGB data can look massively different due to the profile used. And the thing is, we have to use one somewhere. This can cause big surprises in production, and people don't like surprises. And because the devil is in the detail, as we've shown you here, the same pixel data can produce very, very different visual looks due to the profile. Pinning down where the cause for printers can be a big headache. Deconstructing files is a big consumer of time and energy. It's true, many cameras and phones and the internet tend to use RGB, but depending on your Photoshop settings or your InDesign settings, it can be forced or tricked into moving to 98 without you knowing it, depending on how you set up your system. And as mentioned, many people have these settings in their systems, but are not masters of them, and the systems are masters of themselves. And it's typical that in many graphic studios and the like, and design studios, these nuances are not understood. Sure, for professionals it's a choice, but usually that's in the photographic world. And the photographer who's looking after his work will be very vocal usually about how he wants something reproduced. We show that we could have this as near as possible reproduction. We saw that with the two apples. We could reproduce in CMYK, sRGB, and as near as possible reproduce the Adobe in CMYK, but giving us two very different coloured apples. So it's a very important choice to know what you're choosing or what those possibilities are. And just a word to the Xicon field engineer out there who's faced with mystery colour issues. Well, maybe sometimes you can take a look at the file because all sorts of strange things can happen with the way data is embedded into the file. And it's not necessarily something to do with the engine. So there is a kind of wisdom of having no surprises. This is going to lead us on eventually tomorrow, not tomorrow, on Monday when we start to discuss profiling, the world of source profiles. But for brand owners, and let's face it, brand owners drive the publishing industry, they don't want the best possible gamut. They want reproduction of their advertisements, which they spend millions of dollars on, being reproduced consistently and repeatability. So to do this, we need to move away from this concept of having the biggest possible gamut, but having a controlled and printable one. So we see now that we need to have a method where we can have proof and print over many companies, maintaining a similar or very close look and feel. And this is done by using CMYK colour standards. And the reason for that is that we print CMYK. I'm sure if we had RGB printing methodologies, we'd have RGB standards. And these standards, such as ISO, FOGRA, Gracol, SWAP, all represent reasonable and achievable print looks and feels. So when you're spending your millions of dollars of budget on your David Beckham campaign, then you can be assured that it's going to print and look the same throughout the world. And there's a certain logic and feel about that. But what about our small printers? What about the guy on the street, our customers who are not huge multinational printers? Well, I did some research on the internet, and all these files I've supplied you here are going to be downloadable with this WebEx at the end. And what the printers say throughout the world is no RGB. This one will even charge you to convert. And again, no RGB. The reason is they don't want surprises in what they in the jobs they take in. So again, we see our little Photoshop icon, which means I must do something. We see here a wonderfully bright image. And if we were to use that in our pre-press workflow, keeping it as RGB, and then maybe printing it on a proofer with with a wide gamut, we would probably reproduce this and it would look beautiful and shiny. However, when we check our gamut warning, we see most of it is unreproducible. So we need to remove this unfairness out of our production and the surprises. So is it not better at the beginning to simply move to CMYK? We see the bottles, the blue has lost some of its vibrancy. But sure enough, you can use techniques in Photoshop to try to bring some of that back. That wasn't a good example, but you're working within in a known space where you can control it. This has been known. This is why the brand owners of large brands insist on CMYK only, but also why our print shops also insist on CMYK only coming in, as they don't want surprises. So creating some artwork we said we would do today, and I think it's fair to say that we have different industry sectors, and those industry sectors have different skill sets and different challenges. As in everything in life, this is very generic, and I'm sure there are exceptions to all these rules. But if we take our print-on-demand customer, often he's having to deal with Microsoft Office type work and print whatever he's given. And he's, generally speaking, his only tool to get the best out of that work will be his RIP, will be his X800. We have then people producing labels and packaging, commercial printers, but I've split them into implant and established. What I often see in an implant environment is the skill level's a little bit less than an established print shop who's gone through the process of investing in pre-press equipment and the like, and staff in the past. We also have our new applications, and again I've put this over the skill range because new applications such as photo books, wallpaper, these can sometimes be just people setting up a new business opportunity without any background in print, or it could be an established company with a lot of experience looking at a new application. So again, I spread them over the skill set. And what's true is within those kind of environments, we'll have the tools, not just the RIP, but we'll have often graphic arts tools and maybe specialised tools such as ESCO workflows to help them create their work. So let's address our print-on-demand customer. Generally speaking, they don't have any more tools to do anything other than create a simple PDF. But if they were asked would they want to invest in any more tools, they answered probably no. They simply want their machine to work like the photocopier in the corner of the room. They're dealing with a lot of mixed data and don't really have an understanding of what that data is. So they're unlike our professional photographer who will demand it to look as near as, for example, Adobe 98. Our guy working in the office dealing with PowerPoint documents and pictures off the internet just wants it to look good, and he doesn't want any surprises. He also wants it to look like it did last time, and he also wants his company logo to be reasonably reproduced. In my opinion, this customer needs the RIP more than any of our customers to really look after this mess he's dealing with. And so, although they might not have the skills up front to look for colour management, if the RIP is not set correctly, we can really get into a place where we see some surprises. Again, here we have a Word document, a typical Word document, where we have text, graph from Excel, we have an RGB image, but the guy putting this together in a print-on-demand environment has no concern if it's sRGB or Adobe. He has a CMYK image, but that's more luck and judgment. He doesn't know what a CMYK data is. And he makes a PDF. He doesn't have any fancy tools. And if we look at the construction of that PDF afterwards,
did you have already Ludo with the car keys? The receptionist was calling. Is Bruce already at home? I said, I don't think so. And Ludo cost me to need them. Yeah. I will give them to Ludo, eh?
okay.
Yep.
A little bit of an interruption there regarding car keys, but here we go. So, we can look at the construction of this PDF. So here we see all the RGB elements. Here we see the CMYK elements, and it's been put together with no other intent than to make some print. So it's very important then that we have our X100 set up to make sure that our black RGB text comes out as black, that our picture comes out as near as possible to what you'd like to see on screen, and the CMYK also comes out in a reasonable manner. So we can see the challenges our print-on-demand customer is faced with, and he has no other skills to change anything or to make any kind of instruction. Now, today is not about what's right or wrong. It's about explaining to you some of the pitfalls which are out there facing our customers. We have now our professional printer. As discussed, he's often not creating the job. He may well be faced with kind of print-on-demand work, but also professionally put together work. Often he'll have rules, as we've discussed, for accepting the work coming into his factory, and will own the tools to fix jobs as well. However, often he will see his digital printer as a black box, which they never open. So when colour is coming out incorrectly, these guys will not look at the file because they have all the tools and expertise in knowing their file is correct, and will often beat you up and say, well, it's coming out of my conventional press correctly, and will look to you to wonder why it's not coming out of our digital press in the right way. And one of the biggest problems around these guys who have this expertise and experience is they use conventional mindsets around fixing colour issues. So again, at the end of the line, we have our X800 workflow, and using that in the correct manner will lead us to success, making these guys kind of happy. So we're going to dive in now and just have a look at creating a graphic arts file. For those of you who might be interested, I've never seen this done. Here we have a piece of software called InDesign. I'm sure you've all heard of it, and we're going to start off by adding a spot colour, which is contained within this logo. So we have now fizzy soda, and our soda pop red is here, and if I double click, it tells me it's a spot colour or a named colour. If you remember, we have our fizzy pop CMYK. And we're going to drop in here its RGB original. Okay. So we're now going to export this job, but the question is how? Very often we have some clues, such as high quality print. Let's go and have a look at what's going to happen here. We're going to have no colour conversion, so our RGB is going to stay as RGB. So in this case, we're not going to pass the rules set by all those printing companies. But let's go ahead and see what happens when we do that. If we have a look at RGB, we have our RGB picture here, and if you remember 10 minutes ago, one printer was going to charge us for converting that particular picture. Here we have our CMYK elements, and here's our spot colour or named colour. However, if you hadn't been shown any different, it would be perfectly understandable that you would be exporting your PDF this way. Let's try again. And we can use one of the PDFX routines. And again, it's saying no color conversion. We have here Pass for Press, which is a UK publishing standard, and it's asking to convert everything to Fogra 39. So if we do this, we now should find oops, that we have no RGB data. We still have our CMYK data, and it's going to come out the same. And we have our spot color. The whole lesson or part of today's presentation is to simply illustrate to you guys the minefield which is out there and can be caused by putting together a graphic arts file in a right or wrong manner. And there is no right or wrong manner. And we have to work, I think, with our customers in a partnership to help them put together the best possible work to suit their environment. So in summary, hopefully you've seen that now that creating PDF is a minefield. PDFX and the like, and people like Pass for Press, try to remove the surprises, and Perinta's also publish the way they would like PDF supplies. I think at Zycon we shouldn't assume that our customers know what they're processing, and sometimes if we're unraveling colour issues with customers, we have to work in a kind of partnership with them, because it's not just about the engine, it goes a lot further and into the file construction, but even layers below that. So it's not just a case of CMYK RGB, it's what CMYK, what RGB, what and the like. So if we can explain these choices to customers, I think it'll be appreciated. Also, having tools at hand such as a full copy of Acrobat, so you can take to pieces a PDF, will help. Some customers will appreciate the fact that we can use the X800 to lock down choice. So by that I mean everything goes to sRGB, everything goes to Fogra, everything is emulated into Fogra. Or some customers will like a strategy where they offer choice, where the bits and pieces in a file are respected. But I think we have to open our eyes to the fact that there are many choices, and we have to be able to understand that there's no right or wrong, but the question has to start with, what would you like? So thank you again. Concludes number 3. As I said, this is a little bit bitty, is this one, but needed to be done. Okay, I will unmute you all and please ask questions as and when. Any questions?
Normaal doen ze des avonds en dat ik het nu op zit, dan krijg ik iets vol, of hè? En je nu op zit, dan krijgen we er straks ook niks meer in, hè.
If there's no questions, I'm going to shut. Okay, well, I'm going to thank you and hopefully talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Bruce.